Hi, this is Kathy with City Farmhouse Studio. With the Choose Your Own Adventure shoes, you can make a wide variety of shoes or slippers, depending on what you prefer, whether it's crochet, knitting, choose your yarn, choose your gauge, whatever stitch pattern. For simplicity and ease, I have shown stockinette for knitting and for a single crochet for the crochet. You can choose your own stitch pattern, but you'll need to know how to increase on each end of the row. Choose an option of a slipper with some 3D fabric paint on the bottom for some grippiness, or a hard sole of your choice. There's also the option to add additional height around the ankle for a little boot. So with all these possibilities, the options are endless, and you get to choose your own adventure. You're going to need quite a few little supplies. First, you can use whatever yarn you prefer, whatever stitch structure. I have some leftover yarn from the Weekender cardigan that is no longer in production. So I've gone ahead and machine knit a sample of that. I have the Bernat blanket yarn in two different colors. One, I've gone ahead and crocheted just with the single crochet a swatch. So I have my hook for that. In the gray color, I have gone ahead and hand knit a sample of that. Here is the Bernat yarn color. It is still in production as of recording. A lot of times Joann's has it on sale. It is 100% polyester and it is a bulky yarn, 220 yards. I'm expecting to get at least 2 pairs of shoes from each one of these, so a total of 4. But we do have a way for you to measure how much you need to see if stash busting. You can have enough yarn in that particular yarn to make a pair of shoes. Always fun to get halfway through a project and find out you don't have what you need. You will need a rug or a sole. This is just a doormat. Got for $5 at Dollar Tree. Really easy. I actually used a pair of scissors, kid-size scissors, to cut that. You will need a measuring tape. I've used E6000 adhesive since it's flexible. And then you'll need a piece of paper for the pattern. I've gone ahead and traced out my foot. And then I have another phone just to show the pattern math, to use the calculator. And I've gone ahead and printed out the PDF version of the pattern. So quite a few things going on, but I promise you this looks crazier, but you'll only have one craft. So unlike most patterns where you just find your size and you go from there, this one you need to figure out your measurements for your fabric along with your feet, and then determine what stitches you need and how many rows to create the pattern based on your gauge swatch. Everything's formatted to where you just look at the letters and plug and play and do the math itself. It looks complicated, but I'm going to walk you through it. So first, so I don't forget, I'm going to put that this is Kathy's, and I'm going to do a knit with this material here so that we can easily see the stitch definitions. The Bernat blanket yarn I really do like, but it is hard to see where the rows start and the stitches start. So for clarity on the video, we're going to show this one. So for the first thing you need to determine is how many stitches and how many inches of your pattern gauge. So I'm going to do that really quick. So in 4 stitches, and I'm going to, with this yarn, it kind of stretches, so I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. I have 13 stitches, and that is over 4 inches. Now I need to figure out how many stitches are in just 1 inch. So to do that, you take this number with your handy dandy calculator. So you take that number and divide it by that number. So for 13 stitches and 4 inches, you have 3.25 stitches in 1 inch. Now we need to do the same thing, but for rows. So just the same. So I have 21 rows over 4 inches. Now sometimes I find for stitches or rows, it's easier to get an even number in 6 or 5. You know, if you're right in the middle of a stitch, go ahead and put a half a stitch for your measurement. But the 4 inches, you are not held to 4 inches. Go with what's easier for you and what you're most comfortable with. Okay, so now I need to divide this number by this number. So divide your rows by number of inches, and there are 5.25 rows in 1 inch based on this measurement. Now I need to find the material thickness of your gauge, and this comes into play especially whenever you are going around your foot with a thicker material, because you would measure from here, but it only gets from the inside to inside. Going around, you need a little bit more oomph to get around with that thick material. Some of our knit fabrics, we don't get as much thickness, but it's still an important measurement to consider. So I have 1/8 of an inch for this material. So hopefully everyone knows you have a whole inch. The middle is cut into half. The next ones are quarters, and then these little ticks are 1/8. And if you're like me and cannot remember what decimal is the fraction, you take the top number, so for me 1, and you divide it by the bottom number, which is 8, and I get 0.125. Okay, now you're going to need a drawing of your foot, or you can use your foot itself. If you're making it for someone, have them trace out their bottom and get this measurement for you before they leave. So we're going to measure around the widest part around your foot. So that for me is around here, going from the bottom of the sole all across the arch and back around. And for me, that measurement is 8.5. Now you want to trace out and measure the length from the bottom of the heel up to your toe. And for me, that's 9.75. And then the length of the big toe, and that goes to just about where that knuckle that goes across your foot is. And for me, it is 2.5, or 2.5 inches. Okay, so we're done with this till later. We will use this to create the template for our sole, so don't lose that. Now we're going to start finding out some of the measurements we need for the fabric we're going to create. So for now, we're going to find the foot length. So we're going to take E. So you go up and you find your 9.75. And we're going to add an optional 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch, depending on your preference. For this type of material, it stretches really easily, so I'm not as concerned about adding any material to that. However, for this crochet sample where there's very minimal give, if you want a tight fit, go ahead and leave your measurement as is. If you wanted a little bit more room to wear a sock, have a little more breathing room, go ahead and add 0.25. And then for a child, go ahead and add a 1/2 inch if you are wanting even more room for growing. So for that, either 9.75 as is would go in G, or the 0.25 added to it, or the 0.5 added to it. For me, I'm going to add it, not add anything in, and leave it as 9.75. For my material sample on the crochet, I did go ahead and add it up to 10. So even though it's the same foot, based on what you're working with and what your preference is, you may get a different number. So that is how much material we need going from the toe to the bottom, the back of the heel, we need 9.75 inches of fabric. Now we need to go from around your foot, how wide of a piece we need to make. So we're going to take the measurement of D, which is 8.5, and add our material thickness, which is C. So I had 0.125, and I get H, which is 8.625. So I need to make a piece of fabric in general that is 9.75 inches long and 8.625 inches wide. Now for this pattern, we do taper the material width up at the toe, so it gets a little bit of a taper. And we need to find out that width, how much of the material for that wide. So we're going to take our measurement of 8.625 for me, and we just are going to times it or multiply 8.625 times 0.7. So that toe width is going to be 6.0375. Now that is a double. That goes from around the bottom all the way around the toe area. Okay, so now we have our material kind of structure basic math. Now we need to figure out what stitches, how many rows from all of those inches that we have. So to begin, we're going to find out your beginning stitches, or your cast on, your foundation single crochet, your beginning stitches. So we're going to take I, 6.0375, and multiply it by your gauge stitches, so 3.25. And it's already still in my calculator, so I'm just going to multiply it by 3.25, and I get a crazy number of 19.621875. Now I want to round this to the nearest even number. So I'm going to take my 19.621875 and round it up to 20. Since it's above 19, I would go to 20. If it was below 19, I would go to 18. But since it's above 19, I'm rounding up. So that's our stitches for the toe area at 6.375. Now we need to see how much we increase to go around that widest part of the foot. So we're going to take that measurement, which is H, so down here, and multiply it again by our gauge for stitches. And I get 28.03125. So I need to round it to the nearest even number. So I'm going to round it down to 28. So this again, you can kind of look at your materials. You know, this being stretchy, I'm not as concerned about getting enough width to go around my foot to be comfortable, especially if I'm wearing a sock. Whereas this, if I had 29 even, I would go up to 30 stitches to make sure I have enough width to get in there. For this, I know I can stretch and it's going to grow and be okay and comfortable. So based on your stitch structure, your material, your construction, you kind of can judge yourself. Now we need to know how many number of times we need to increase to get from this number at the toe to this widest area number. So we take K, which is 28 for me, and we minus J. And now you'll notice there's a divide by 2. Now these parentheses before that divide by 2 mean we need to subtract 28 minus 20 first, which gives me 8. And I need to divide that number by 2, which gives me 4 times. If I do it, if I just plug this into a long calculator, some of the fancier scientific calculators, if you just put in 28 minus 20 divided by 2 all in one row, by math processes, it will divide the 21st by 2, which gives you 10, which then it would subtract 28 minus 10, giving you 18. That's a big difference of number of times to decrease. So just make sure you get your processes first. All right, so now that we have how many times we are decreasing, we need to figure out over how many rows for those decreases to get from your toe area up to that beginning portion. So we're going to take F, which is over here, that toe measurement, 2.5, and multiply it by your rows, 5.25. So how many rows in your toe area are there? And it says again to round to the nearest whole number. So I get 13.125. I'm going to round that down to 13. So now I need around 13 rows to increase from 20 stitches up to 28 stitches. Okay, so 4 times I'm increasing, 1 stitch on each side. So how many rows for each of those increase do I get? So I have 13 rows total, and I need to increase 4 times. So 13 divided by 4, and I get 3.25. And I'm going to round to the nearest whole number. Because we're knitting, we're crocheting, we do have some give with that foot area. If it goes up or down a row or two, it's not going to be as big of an issue. So I have 3.25. I'm going down to 3. All right, so 3 rows for each of my increases. How many rows? I have 1 row of increase. So I'm going to subtract that 1 row from my total number of rows. So I have 1 row with my increases on it, and then 2 rows following it of just an even number of stitches. So now, since we rounded to 13, I want to make sure I know how many final rows are in that toe section. So I'm going to take L, which is the number of times we're doing it, and my total number of rows in each of those sections, and I get 12. And we're moving on. So I know a lot of this still isn't making a lot of sense for a pattern, but we're getting there. All right, so now we have that toe section and the increase. Now we want to know how far we need to go to get the final length of the foot. So we're going to take our G measurement, which is the total length of the foot we need, and multiply that by our gauge in rows, and then subtract it from the number we had for the toe section. Now you can see I did not put parentheses in here, because if you do plug that into Scientific Calculator, it will go ahead and give you the correct number. So that minus 12. So I need 39.1875, round to the nearest whole number, gives me 39 rows. So that is all we need to find out our basic pattern information. Now, a lot of us have some yarn stash, and it's always nice and feels productive whenever we can use something that we already have and not need to go out and purchase something. So I've gone ahead and put this section in for length of yarn needed, so you can see if you have enough material to make a complete pair of shoes. We don't want to be playing yarn chicken with shoes and only have 1.5 pairs of shoes, and our yarn is discontinued and we cannot go out and find any more, or you're paying an arm and a leg to get 2 inches of a shoe. So we're going to find out how much yardage we need per pair of shoes based on your yarn, your material, swatch, and your size of foot. So for that, we need to take your swatch. I'm pulling out a ruler. And this I did not bind off, so that we can pull out to see how many stitches we need per inch. So I'm going to pull out one more so that it's right at that loop. Crochet, I'll show you that as well. And I'm going to go find a good loop still in that loop. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches I pulled out. And I'm just going to measure that, and I get 6.75 stitches, 6.75 inches in 8 stitches. So just like with our gauge, we take your inches. This time it's a little reverse because we want to find out how much per stitch, not per inch. So 6.75, your length divided by your stitches, and you get 0.843. Crochet, kind of a similar process. There's my loop from a stitch, and I would just count 1, 2, 3. So that's the length I would need in this crochet stitch with this crochet yarn for 3 stitches. Okay, so now we need to figure out how many stitches are in our pair of shoes. So this again gets a little complicated. We're going to take our J number, which is our beginning stitch number, and add the final number of K. Where's the K? It's 28. And I want to add those together and divide it by 2. And that gives a general amount of stitches in that toe area. We want to multiply it by P, which is how many rows are in that toe area. And I get 288 stitches. Okay, so now how many stitches are after that increase? So that solid straight rows, we're going to get K, and then our Q number. So the straight rows, I will have 1,092 stitches. So how many stitches are in one shoe? We take that S in our toe area and add it to the straight area. And for one of my knit shoes, 1,380. So those are stitches. Now we need to transfer that by our R number, which is the length per one stitch. So we will use 1,163.34 inches to make one shoe. All right, now we have 2 shoes, so we want to do 1,163.34 times 2. So we will need 2,326.68 for a total set of for 2 shoes. And now we always know that our skeins are measured in yards. So we want to take this number, I'm just shortening it since it's already on my calculator, and divide it by 36 because there are 36 inches in 1 yard. And I get an even 72 yards needed with this stitch and this yarn to make a pair of shoes needed in my size. So you can see if you have enough engaged from there. Okay, so now we know our basic math. We know we have enough yarn to make our pair of shoes. Now let's find out how we're going to make those shoes. So we're going to cast on or crochet a chain of J stitches. So we go back and find our J, and that's 20. And we're going to work those 20 stitches in your gauge pattern. Now we're going to increase 1 stitch on each edge of the row. Okay, And then you're going to work a number of rows as stated by 0. So 2. And now I'll go through with all the crafts exactly how to make and interpret these into a shoe. So how you would increase with a crochet, how you would increase with a knit structure. Sorry, let me rephrase. How do you would increase with a single crochet stitch, how you would increase with the hand knit and also on the machine. So look below for those specific times. Now we're going to repeat row 2 and additional rows until you have K. So we go back and find our K, and that is 28 for me. Now we want to continue working those stitches for Q, 39 rows, or until the piece measures your final length, 9.75. Now if you are knitting, especially if you have a very large stitch, this pattern, one stitch is almost a half an inch. So if you go that full 9.75 and then have a bind off row, you're going to have almost 10.25 inches, and your shoe will be a lot larger than you anticipated. So also it depends on your bind off process, but if you add another row to bind off, stop before you get that final number. Crocheting, you're good, you just bind off. Okay, so that is our pattern, and that is what we need to know to begin making our shoes. Go ahead and look below and go to your craft, whether you are crocheting, you are knitting by hand or on the machine, and jump to that to make the pair of slippers using crochet. I am using K-hook, again the Bernat blanket yarn, and I began with a slip knot on my hook. Looking at the pattern, it says to crochet a chain of 18 stitches. I have the number of stitches I needed. Now I need to work that many stitches in my gauge, but it did not include a turning chain for me, so I'm going to add one more and go into the next single crochet and make my stitch. And I continue doing that right on down the line. So there's my 18 stitches. Now it says to increase one stitch on each edge of the row. So for this single crochet, I'm just going to chain one, go into my first stitch, and make 2 single crochets in that one stitch. So that's my increase of 1. Now I'm going to go back along. So I'm at my last stitch, and I'm going to make 1, go straight back in, and make my increase. So there I should have 2 more stitches more than I did of my foundation chain. Okay, so now below that row 2, it says work the number of rows as stated by your number O. So for me, with this pattern and this gauge, I just have 1 row of working my pattern straight into the stitches below. So I did my turning chain, and now I am just single crocheting across. So there I've completed the solid row, this even number of stitches. And it says repeat row 2, so the row with the increases on each end, and any additional row that you have until you have so many stitches. So I'm going to keep doing that. So you just keep repeating the 2 increases in the first stitch, working evenly in each stitch to your last, and then increasing there until you have that number of stitches specified in K. So that was my increase row. Now chain 1 and work evenly back and across. Okay, so there I have finished all my increases in straight rows for that section. And then I'm going to continue working the stitch pattern of my final stitch number for so many rows until my piece measures my foot length. So you just keep working that chain 1, work a single crochet in each stitch until you get your specified pattern length. Once you're done with that, you can bind off. I would leave a good tail to sew in at the end. That will help you sew additionally. And then make another one. Start with the hand knitting. You can cast on any preferred way that you prefer. I am going to do a long tail, so I need a good length for casting on, for weaving in later on. And then I'm just going to measure kind of a rough amount to start with. Generally 3 times the length of your piece is what you need. So for me, slingshot, so the tail is coming towards me and to the skein is away. I go over the thumb and forefinger, grab it below. You pull down to be a slingshot looking thing. And I just go from the bottom and pick up the loop on the outside of my thumb and pull the yarn to the skein through it. And I need to make that my number of stitches I needed for the cast on. So 2, 4. For me, that is 14. Okay, so once you have your stitches cast on, the pattern says to work 1 row in your gauge pattern. Now I know that the next row is going to be an increase, and I prefer to have as many increases on a knit row. So for this first row that I'm going to work, I will purl. It does not matter, since I'm just working stockinette, whether you increase on a knit or a purl row. If you're doing a garter stitch, no matter what, if you have an odd or an even number of your increased sections, no matter what, you're going to be on a purl or a knit row, sorry. Oh, come on. Okay, so now that I have my first row complete, I am going to work the row that says to increase 1 stitch on each edge of the row. There are many different types of stitches that you could use to increase. For me, what I preferred doing is knitting the first stitch, and then you need to go not the stitch that was on the hook, but the loop that that stitch was made in, and pick that up. And I know that's kind of hard to see with this yarn, but that is what it is doing. And you knit into that. And then you knit 1 more. Down till you have 1 stitch left. And I'll keep showing you that. Okay, so the end kind of shows it a little bit better than the beginning. So I have my last stitch on the row, and then you can kind of see with this yarn that stitch below. I'm going to pick that up and put it on, knit that one, knit the last stitch on my hook. Sorry, my needle. Just finished the crochet one. I would have saying hook. All right, so after your row of increasing, you're going to work an additional number of rows just straight. So for me, I will purl and knit straight 2 rows. So there I've done my 1 row of increase, and I have a knit that was in knit. So then I completed a row of purl and a row of knit to get back to where it says to repeat the row 2 and any additional rows until you have a total number of K. So now I am on a purl row and I need to increase. So I'm going to purl the first stitch off. Now I can see this was my purl stitch before. I want to go to that yarn that is below it and pick that up. And I will purl into it. And then purl down to where 1 stitch remains. So there we can see the stitch that is currently on the hook, the needle, the loop of the stitch before I want to pick up. And then I will purl into that one, purl my last stitch, and there my row of 2 increase was complete. So now I'll go ahead and knit and purl another row and keep repeating that section of increase and straight rows until I have as many stitches as I need. So I'm inserting this little section in so that you can really see where you're picking up for the yarn increase, the stitch increase. The fuzzy yarn, I don't know if it's showing up enough, it kind of blurs together, so hopefully this helps. So for the first increase, you're going to want to work that first stitch and slide it off. Now I need to go 1 stitch below what was just worked in. So that was my working stitch. And I want to find that loop that lays kind of that chain below and pick that up and knit into that stitch. And then I will knit to where 1 stitch remains. Now here is the stitch that is on the needle. There's the stitch below. I want to pick that up, knit that, knit my last stitch. So now I've made an increase on those 2. Now I'll work a couple rows and show you a purl version. So here I'm on the purl row, and I'll want to purl the first stitch, and then pick up not the stitch I just worked in, the one that it was worked into, and not split the yarn. Then I'll purl into that stitch again, work till 1 stitch remains, this one's a lot easier to see because you can see your stitch on the needle, lift the stitch it was worked into, and I'll purl that in the last stitch. And there you can see how it starts increasing off of that edge stitch, which we will be seaming these together whenever we sew our shoe together. So there you go. So there I've completed all my increased sections in the straight rows. I have my final number of stitches on my needle. And now the instructions say to repeat that stitch pattern, for me it's stockinette, for the same number of stitches for a total number of rows above this, or until my piece measures that length of the foot that I need. Now for me, I will go ahead and do that and show you the bind off and how I measured once I get to that portion. So I've gotten to the knit sample where it measures just about one row for this swatch. It's 1/4 of an inch. So I needed a total of 9.75. I'm at 9.5. So now I'm going to bind off, because I do a bind off where I add an additional row. So for the bind off that I do, that gives a little bit of an extra length, that gives a little bit of extra space for the bind off row. How you start is you knit 2 stitches, and I pull a little bit more to give a little bit more of a larger loop, and then you pass the first stitch that you made over the second, and then you knit 1 more and pass that stitch over, and you just keep on continuing down, binding off. So the last stitch, knit 1, pass that one over. Now I'm going to cut my tail and give me plenty of extra length, because I will be using this to seam. And you just pull that through the loop. And there's your bind off. And my piece now measures exactly as my gauge needed, 9.75. Perfect. Now let's move on to seaming it up. I am doing 20, so I have 10 on each side of the bed. So I am just going to E-wrap cast on very loosely, just kind of circling each of the needles. Put that through, and I am just going to knit my 1 row. So that would be my cast on, being my cast on, my weight comb, cast on comb through that. And I'm going to take it back because I do not want my cast on to be considered part of my row count. So if you look at the instructions, it says to work 20 stitches in your gauge pattern. So for us, that just means knitting 1 row across. Now we are going to increase 1 stitch on each side. So I am going to take each stitch on the edge over, and I'm going to go into the stitch below the one I just moved and put that onto the empty needle that I just made. I'm going to repeat that on this side. And lift that stitch up onto the empty needle. Now, unlike knitting where you increase as you go, we've increased. Don't forget to knit. Okay, so now I need to work the number of rows as stated by O. So working plain, I need to knit 2 rows. And I need to repeat my increase in the straight rows until I have 28 stitches for me. So I now have 22. Each increase increases by 1. So I'll keep repeating that process of moving a stitch, lifting the one below, moving a stitch, lifting the one below, make sure you don't split the yarn, and then knit for the increase, and then knit your straight rows and continue increasing. Knit the one for this increase row, and then your straight rows. All right, so I have one more for my gauge. So knit 1, knit 2 more. All right, so there I have my intended number of stitches. And I look at the pattern and it says continue working the stitch pattern of 28 stitches for me for 39 rows or until piece measures 9.75. So I'm going to back my row count down because I don't like doing math that I don't have to. And then I'll knit 38 rows because if you keep reading, if knitting, stop 1 row short for bind off. And I add another row for binding off. So I want to go one row less, so 38. So I am working 1. And then just take that, place it over. And I'm not pulling it any too tight of a stitch after I pull it over. Move your 1 loop over, knit those together, move that over, knit them together. And the last stitch, go through 1 more, because when you cut, I'm going to leave enough to weave in and sew up that heel side. Give yourself some extra. And there is the basic for your shoe pattern. So repeat that for another one and follow along to see how to sew it all together to make your slipper shoe. So to hem up your shoes, and this goes for the machine knit, the crochet version, and the hand knitting sample, no matter your gauge or the thickness of the material. You're going to start by sewing the toe up. And to do that, how I do, and you go from the corner from your cast on, and you just pull that together so you kind of know where they start. Now you want this middle portion, this join, to be in the middle of your toe. So you just kind of fold it in flat like a sandwich, and then working from loop around to the next loop. And I like to go on the inside loop edge. So for the heel, once you have your tail woven onto your needle, just go into the corner at the top to pull it together, and then going stitch by stitch, and just seam that edge up. Now if you are wanting to do a boot cuff, don't make this too tight, because depending on which needles you have, you will need to take it out. But you're going to want to have it sewn so that you can make sure this is the right amount. Okay, and then you come down to the end. And I am going to leave that open so for these I do want to make a boot cuff, but otherwise I'd just weave it in my tail a little bit, making sure it's secure, and then cut off the extra. To sew up for crochet, you just take your tail from your cast on edge, the shorter edge, and go into the opposite corner. And pull that tight. Now this will be at the top of your foot, so you want to kind of make a sandwich from there. So this join is in the center. And then from there, you loop through that beginning chains loops, going through one edge. I pulled my needle off. Go to the very end, and then you just kind of work your way back. Pull that out, no. So that you can go up the other side. So I work back towards the center, and now I want to come up to make the top part of the shoe. And I should have given myself a longer cast on tail or foundation chain, but too late now. You want to go about halfway through the top of the foot. To leave enough opening for your foot. See if that's good enough. Once we have the heel done, you can try it on and see if you need to go up any further. I have a cat visiting me. So for the heel, it's very much similar. So I have the tail hooked on. And you go into the edge of the corner. Play with that one. And pull that tight. And then instead of it going flat like we did on the toe, just want to keep it going up and down. And whip stitch that around. Go all the way down to the last stitch. And then weave in that end. I'm just gonna kind of go back up through some of those stitches. And on the inside of the fabric, I am feeling to make sure the needle is not coming too far through the other side. That should be enough. Trim that one. And then I'm ready to try it on. And again, adjust this space here as needed. So once you have everything sewn up and everything's fitting, it's time to work on the soles of your shoes. So go ahead and get that traced outline of your foot again. And what you can see here that I've done is just gone out between 1/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch around and just generalized a shoe footprint. And this is going to become our template. So you'll go ahead and cut this out. Once you have that, go ahead and bring out your mat. And you're going to, I'm going to turn it this way. Trace an outline of your shoe. Now I'm going to angle it so I don't have to do as much cutting. So how this line is pretty well straight now. It's marked up to the bottom corners. You just start marking your outline on your sole material. So once you have one shoe traced, you need to do another one. Now, this would be for my right foot, so turn it over and that will be for your left foot. And I'm going to turn it around, align that line up. Again, less cutting. And there we go. Now it's time to cut out. Now for this material, again, it isn't all that thick, but I was able to cut out with this pair of child scissors, which actually really surprised me. And you want to go ahead and cut all the way around both of these to get your shoe soles cut out. So once you have your soles cut out, go ahead and get your shoes and your soles and your adhesive. I am using E6000. It's an industrial strength adhesive. And the reason I chose this is it binds many different materials together, but it also said it was flexible. You go ahead and take this off, turn the cap around and puncture the top. And once you have that done, you're going to go around the very edge and have a nice smooth bead all the way around, and then make squiggles in the inside. And then two ways you can do this to put on your shoe. If it is for someone else, line the heel up and hold that down, and then roll your toe forward to meet it down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be wearing my shoes, get the glue on, and then step on it. So that way I know for me, these are exactly fitting how I want them to fit on me, and fit on the soles, how my feet will sit comfortably on the soles. So here are the little shoes I made for my daughter. In the soles, you can see they're nice and flexible, nice soft inside the sole. And you could go around and kind of tack in a little bit more, but she was really happy with these and is anxiously waiting for me to be done so she can wear these off in her classroom whenever the snow comes around. So another option for your shoes, besides having a hard sole or leaving them as plain slippers, is to add some grippiness to the bottom. And what I have is some black puff paint, 3D fabric paint. You can get it at craft stores. Just go ahead and add some grippy dots all along the bottom. Think back to kid shoes, kid socks, the baby's shoes. And this will give you some grip, making it a little more non-slid on certain surfaces. You can really get creative with your patterning. I'm just doing little dots throughout here. And then you can go on down for the bottom of your foot, and then be sure to get some on this back end heel area. Okay, we'll let that dry. Let our shoe soles dry. And then we have some nice slippers for everyone in the family. So there you have the Choose Your Own Adventure shoes. I hope you enjoyed this pattern and can create some wonderful shoes and slippers for everyone in your family. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss out on any other patterns from City Farmhouse Studio. Bye!